The rain had been falling steadily since early evening, drumming against the windshield of Daniel's old sedan as he navigated the winding country road. The wipers worked overtime, smearing the water in a hypnotic rhythm, and the beam of his headlights barely pierced the curtain of rain ahead. The GPS signal had cut out nearly 30 minutes ago, leaving him dependent on fading road signs and his memory. Every so often, a flash of lightning illuminated the landscape, revealing skeletal trees swaying violently in the wind, their branches clawing at the black sky. The sense of isolation pressed heavily on him. No other cars, no houses, just endless road and the low growl of thunder. As the minutes passed, Daniel's unease grew. His phone's battery had slipped into the red, and the eerie quiet between the bursts of thunder only made him more aware of his own breathing. Then, out of the darkness, his headlights caught a figure standing on the shoulder of the road. A lone man, drenched from head to toe, wearing what looked like an old, tattered trench coat. He didn't move to flag Daniel down. He simply stood there, his head tilted slightly downward, as if he were listening to something deep beneath the sound of the rain. Instinct screamed at Daniel to keep driving, but the idea of leaving someone stranded in this weather gnawed at his conscience. He slowed the car to a cautious stop and rolled the window down just enough for his voice to carry over the roar of the storm. "You need a ride?" Daniel called, his words almost swallowed by the wind. The man lifted his head slightly, revealing pale skin, water streaming from his slick back hair, and eyes that seemed too dark to reflect the light. "Yes," the stranger said, his voice low but clear, as if unaffected by the wind or the rain. Without waiting for an invitation, he opened the passenger door and slid in, the smell of wet earth and something faintly metallic following him inside. The car suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier. They drove in silence for several minutes, the rain hammering the roof like nails. Daniel tried to make small talk, asking where the man was headed, but his passenger only gave short, vague answers. "Just further down," he would say, pointing vaguely toward the darkness ahead. Each time lightning flashed, Daniel caught glimpses of the man's hands resting on his knees, unnaturally still, with long, pale fingers that didn't seem to twitch even once. The stranger didn't shiver, didn't adjust his coat, didn't do anything but stare ahead, unblinking, as though he were watching something Daniel couldn't see. It wasn't until Daniel glanced at the rearview mirror that the first real shock hit him. In the faint light of the dashboard, the man's reflection wasn't there. The empty passenger seat stared back at him in the mirror, even though the weight in the seat beside him was unmistakable. His heart lurched, and he gripped the steering wheel tighter. Lightning flashed again, blinding him for a split second, and when his vision cleared, the man had turned his head, not toward Daniel, but toward the back seat, as if listening for someone who wasn't there.
The road narrowed further as Jason pushed deeper into Hollow Bend. The gravel hissed under his tires, the crunching sound swallowed by the rain. His wipers squealed across the glass, fighting the steady curtain of water. The GPS still spoke in its calm, mechanical tone, but the reception icon on the screen flickered in and out, like a heartbeat skipping. With each mile, the sense that he was driving into the wrong place pressed harder against him. Around the next bend, he saw something lying across the road, a dark shape, stretched from one side to the other. He slowed, his headlights sweeping over it. It was a tree branch, thick and slick with rain. Relief fluttered briefly in his chest. At least it wasn't an accident, or something worse. He eased the car forward, rolling the front tires over the limb, the suspension groaning softly, but as he passed, he noticed the ends of the branch were oddly clean. Not splintered from a storm. Cut freshly. The bark at the edges was pale, sap still beating in the rain. Jason's relief dissolved into a tight knot of unease. The branch hadn't fallen, it had been placed there. On purpose. Further ahead, the trees pulled back slightly, opening into a small clearing. The headlights revealed a weathered wooden sign nailed to a crooked post, "Welcome to Hollow Bend." The paint was faded to a ghostly gray, the letters rough-edged as if clawed at. Behind it, a single street lamp stood in the rain, its bulb faintly flickering. There were no houses in sight, no parked cars, no movement, just the lamp buzzing softly in the emptiness. Jason stopped the car. Through the curtain of rain on the windshield, something caught his eye. At the very edge of the light, just beyond where the clearing met the trees, a figure stood. Not moving. Not waving. Just watching. The rain streaked down his window, distorting the shape, but Jason could still make out the faint suggestion of shoulders, a head, and arms hanging unnaturally still at its sides. Jason's first instinct was to blink hard, convincing himself the rain was playing tricks on his eyes. When he opened them, the figure was still there, same position, same rigid stillness. The street lamp's dying bulb flickered again, briefly brightening, and for that split second he thought he saw its head tilt slightly, as though it had noticed his attention. That a cold wave slid down his spine. He reached for his phone, thinking to snap a picture, but the screen stayed black. Dead. It had been on the charger just minutes ago. The GPS voice was gone too, replaced by the low hiss of static from the car's speakers. He glanced back at the road behind him, nothing but darkness and rain swallowing the way he had come. The figure shifted. It didn't step forward so much as drift, the motion subtle but wrong, like watching an old video where the frame rate is slightly off. Jason gripped the steering wheel, torn between slamming the car into reverse or flooring it forward through the clearing. His mind scrambled for an explanation, a lost hiker, some prankster, a trick of light, but the longer he stared, the harder it was to believe the shape in front of him was entirely human. He chose forward. His tires spat gravel as he rolled into the clearing, eyes locked on the figure. But as soon as the beam of his headlights swept over the spot where it had been, the space was empty. No footprints. No sign of movement. Just wet grass swaying in the windless rain. Jason's pulse hammered in his ears. He passed under the street lamp, the flicker of its bulb casting jagged shadows across his windshield, and pushed back into the trees. The road on the other side of the clearing was different, narrower still, the gravel patchy, giving way to mud. The forest pressed close, branches clawing at the sides of the car. He tried to shake the image from his mind, but then his headlights caught something ahead. Another branch. This one larger, blocking the entire road. And standing beside it, in the rain, was the same figure. Jason's breath fogged the inside of the windshield as he stared at the new blockade. The figure didn't move, but its presence was heavier now, as if it filled the narrow stretch of road with an invisible weight. The rain poured in steady sheets, hammering the roof of the car and pooling against the edges of the windshield. He felt the urge to lean on the horn, to shatter the silence between them, but some part of him whispered not to draw its attention more than he already had. He dropped the car into reverse, heart pounding. The tires skidded briefly in the mud before catching, and the headlights swung back toward the clearing. But the moment the beam touched it, his stomach dropped. The road he'd come from was no longer open. The space beyond the street lamp was swallowed by the forest, trees standing where empty road had been only moments ago. The trunks looked damp and freshly disturbed, as though they'd moved there. Jason sat frozen for several seconds, his mind scrambling to process what he was seeing. Rational thought sputtered like a dying engine. Trees didn't just appear. Roads didn't just vanish. But no matter how many times he blinked, the way back remained sealed, the dense wall of wet pine stretching into the darkness. The only road now was the one ahead, the one with the branch and the waiting figure. Slowly, almost reluctantly, he turned the wheel and faced forward again. The figure was still there, exactly as before, no shiver from the rain, no shift in stance, just the faint tilt of its head in his direction. The branch at its feet glistened with fresh water, the clean cut on its edge catching the light. Jason eased the car forward, keeping his eyes on the figure as he drew closer, expecting it to move away. It didn't. When the headlights finally washed over it in full, his stomach tightened. The figure wasn't wearing a coat or rain gear, its clothes looked dated, worn, and far too thin for the weather. The fabric clung to its frame in unnatural angles, as if hanging from something too long and narrow to be human bone. And its face, or the place where a face should have been, was smooth, shadowed, and featureless. Jason's pulse thudded in his ears as the car crept forward. The rain made the figure shimmer in the headlights, like it was more a projection than a person. When the hood of the car was less than 10 feet away, he braked. The branch was thick enough to ruin his suspension if he tried to roll over it, and there was no room to steer around. The figure stood just off-center, its head still at that unnerving angle, the rainwater streaming down its smooth, faceless surface that he gripped the steering wheel, knuckles bone white. The idea of opening the door felt insane, but sitting here wasn't an option. The forest was too quiet. Even the rain, for all its force, sounded muffled, as if it were falling in another place entirely. Jason could feel the weight of the figure's attention, like pressure against his skin, though it made no move toward him. He lowered the window just an inch, enough for the damp air to slip inside. "Hey!" His voice cracked more than he intended. No response. Not a shift. Not a twitch. He tried again, louder this time, but the sound seemed to die in the space between them, as though the forest was swallowing his words whole. The figure's head straightened, and something in that small, deliberate motion made his stomach twist. Jason's mind screamed at him to move, forward, backward, anywhere, but his body lagged behind the thought. Then, in one fluid step, the figure closed half the distance between them. No splashing, no footfalls. Just, there. A dark, dripping hand rested on the branch now, fingers too long, each tipped with something that caught the light for an instant, like wet glass or dull metal. His breath hitched. Whatever this thing was, it didn't belong in any world he understood. Without thinking, Jason threw the car into reverse. Mud spat out from under the tires as the car fishtailed slightly, headlights swinging wildly across the trees. But when he looked in the rearview mirror, his chest locked. There, barely a car's length behind him, the figure stood again, blocking the way. Its head tilted the opposite direction now, as if mocking him. Jason's hands shook as he shifted back into drive, his mind refusing to dwell on how the figure could be both ahead and behind. He floored the accelerator, the tires clawing at the mud until they found enough grip to propel the car forward. The figure ahead didn't move until the headlights were seconds from hitting it, then, in a motion so quick it blurred, it was simply gone, swallowed into the tree line like a shadow snapping shut. He swerved around the branch, the car's undercarriage scraping loudly against it, and sped deeper into the road's winding tunnel of pines. His breath came in short, shallow bursts. Every few seconds, his eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, terrified of what he might see there. Sometimes there was nothing. Sometimes, for the barest flicker of a second, a pale, rain-glossed shape would be there before vanishing again. The forest began to close in tighter. Branches scraped against the sides of the car like nails on a chalkboard, the sound high and sharp. The road beneath him was turning from mud to uneven, mossy stone, forcing him to slow down or risk breaking an axle. That's when the headlights caught something ahead, a shape in the middle of the road again. Jason's stomach dropped. It was the figure. Not far this time, close enough that he could see the faint shimmer of water rolling off its blank face. He spun the wheel hard, forcing the car onto a barely visible path to the right, branches snapping across the hood. The narrow track dipped sharply, mud sucking at the tires, but he didn't care where it led. Anything to avoid passing it again. For a few blessed seconds, the new path seemed empty. But then, up ahead, another branch lay across the way. And beside it, just as before, stood the figure, its head tilted, as if it had been waiting all along. Jason's heart slammed against his ribs. He slammed the brakes, tires locking, mud spraying, and stared in disbelief. No matter where he turned, it was there first. Jason's mind was unraveling. The logical part of him, the part that knew roads didn't shift, that people didn't appear in two places at once, was drowned out by the primal urge to survive. His foot hovered over the gas, but instead of plowing ahead toward the figure, he killed the headlights. The world outside instantly collapsed into blackness, the rain's hiss somehow louder without the hum of light cutting through it. He left the engine running, the dashboard glow his only illumination, and began backing up slowly, trusting his mirrors and the faint outlines of trees to guide him. His hope was simple: if it couldn't see him, maybe it couldn't follow. But as the car crept in reverse, a faint outline began to form in the darkness behind, taller than the trees, somehow, and leaning forward. His fingers clenched around the wheel. No matter how slowly he moved, the shape didn't fade. Jason's chest tightened. He threw the car into gear, spun the wheel, and steered off the road entirely. The suspension jolted as the tires left gravel for slick grass and exposed roots. Pine needles scraped across the windshield in chaotic streaks. It was reckless, but he clung to the belief that a straight line through the forest was his best chance. The GPS had long gone dead. Now there was only instinct and momentum. For a moment, it felt like it might work. The road was gone from sight, swallowed by the trees, and the figure was nowhere to be seen. Jason slowed, ears straining for any sound beyond the engine and rain. Then, faintly, he caught it, a rhythmic creak, like wet rope pulling against wood. It grew louder, circling him in the dark. He spun the wheel again, desperate to orient himself, and that's when the headlights caught something directly ahead. A branch. Thick, fresh, and slick with rain. And beside it, the figure stood, closer than it had ever been. Jason's breath seized in his throat. The head tilt was sharper now, almost a full lean, as though the thing were peering into the car. The rain didn't distort it anymore. Every detail of its water-slick clothing and impossibly long fingers was clear. Hollow Bend hadn't just blocked the roads, it had rearranged itself around him. Jason's heart was no longer racing, it was hammering so hard it felt like it might crack his ribs. He had run out of escape routes, both real and imagined. Every path he'd taken, every turn, every desperate detour had led him back to the same thing: the branch and the figure. It was like being trapped in a maze designed by something that knew him better than he knew himself. His hand slid off the steering wheel, slick with sweat despite the cold. He thought about just flooring it, plowing through the branch, and smashing whatever stood beside it. But something in the back of his mind, a deeper, older instinct, whispered that this thing wanted him to do that. The tilt of its head, the way it never rushed him, the patience, it was waiting. Jason's breathing slowed. His panic was giving way to a strange, dangerous calm. If running didn't work, maybe facing it would. He flicked on the headlights fully, drenching the figure in stark white light. The rain made its blank surface gleam, the water cascading down its narrow body. Its long fingers flexed once, curling inward, then outward again, an almost human gesture that made his skin crawl. He shut off the engine. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the rain hammering the roof. The forest around him felt like it was leaning in, listening. Jason opened the door, stepping out into the downpour. The cold water soaked through his clothes instantly, but his focus was locked on the figure ahead. Every step toward it felt like walking into a vacuum, the sounds of the storm growing distant, muted. By the time he was 10 feet away, the figure moved for the first time, not forward, not back, but to the side, sliding smoothly until it stood directly in the middle of the road. Its head straightened slowly. Jason felt a pressure in his chest, as though invisible hands were holding him in place. Then the faceless surface rippled, like fabric in the wind, and he realized with a cold, gut-deep certainty that it was not wearing a mask. Jason couldn't move. The pressure in his chest deepened until each breath was shallow, ragged. Rain dripped from his hair into his eyes, but he didn't dare blink for too long. The figure's blank surface rippled again, faint but undeniable, as though something beneath it was pressing against the skin of reality itself. Then its hand began to rise. Slow, deliberate. The long, rain-slick fingers unfolded toward him, each movement accompanied by the faint sound of wet rope twisting. The air between them seemed to distort, warping the space like heat rising from asphalt, even though the night was cold enough to numb his hands. Jason wanted to step back, but his legs refused to obey. The moment the hand extended fully, everything went silent. Not just the storm, everything. No rain, no wind, no creak of trees. The world was holding its breath. Jason felt something brushing the inside of his mind, a sensation like fingers trailing along the edges of his thoughts. Images flashed in his head, roads twisting back on themselves, dark woods stretching forever, countless others standing where he was now, their faces blurred and emptied. He gasped and staggered back a step, the pressure loosening just enough for him to move. But the figure followed without walking, closing the gap between them in an instant. Its hand hovered inches from his chest now. The cold radiating from it was so intense he felt it in his bones. His heartbeat thundered, yet the sound of it was trapped inside his skull, nowhere else. Then, with a single, fluid motion, the figure pressed its palm to him. Jason's vision exploded with white. The ground vanished beneath his feet. And when the light dimmed, he was no longer standing on the muddy road, he was back inside his car, engine running, headlights cutting through the rain. Only now, there was no branch, no figure. Just an endless stretch of wet road leading deeper into Hollow Bend. Jason's hands shook as he shifted back into drive, his mind refusing to dwell on how the figure could be both ahead and behind. He floored the accelerator, the tires clawing at the mud until they found enough grip to propel the car forward. The figure ahead didn't move until the headlights were seconds from hitting it, then, in a motion so quick it blurred, it was simply gone, swallowed into the tree line like a shadow snapping shut. He swerved around the branch, the car's undercarriage scraping loudly against it, and sped deeper into the road's winding tunnel of pines. His breath came in short, shallow bursts. Every few seconds, his eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, terrified of what he might see there. Sometimes there was nothing. Sometimes, for the barest flicker of a second, a pale, rain-glossed shape would be there before vanishing again. The forest began to close in tighter. Branches scraped against the sides of the car like nails on a chalkboard, the sound high and sharp. The road beneath him was turning from mud to uneven, mossy stone, forcing him to slow down or risk breaking an axle. That's when the headlights caught something ahead, a shape in the middle of the road again. Jason's stomach dropped. It was the figure. Not far this time, close enough that he could see the faint shimmer of water rolling off its blank face. He spun the wheel hard, forcing the car onto a barely visible path to the right, branches snapping across the hood. The narrow track dipped sharply, mud sucking at the tires, but he didn't care where it led. Anything to avoid passing it again. For a few blessed seconds, the new path seemed empty. But then, up ahead, another branch lay across the way. And beside it, just as before, stood the figure, its head tilted, as if it had been waiting all along. Jason's heart slammed against his ribs. He slammed the brakes, tires locking, mud spraying, and stared in disbelief. No matter where he turned, it was there first.